30 years ago, I stood in front of a comic shop advertising the death of Superman in its window display. That moment outside Heroes World set me on a path, a lifelong fan journey leading directly from that tattered red cape to this podcast. Now, together, we mine Superman's vast 85-year mythology by examining, discovering, and reconsidering the stories that have shaped the last son of Krypton. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss Season 3 of the CW's Superman and Lois is one of the hosts of the STAR SUPERFAN Podcast, Rob O'Connor. Welcome.
Hello. Delighted to be back. Thank you very much.
Yeah, this is not the first time we've podcasted, but the first time you've been on this show because you were on my Power Ranger show, Summoning the Zords, and my George Reeves show, another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman. 2 quick plugs. If you folks haven't listened to those shows, I hope you'll check them out. But this is the first time we have you on the flagship Digging for Kryptonite. Happy to have you here.
Delighted to be here. I have my shovel ready to dig.
Yes. Let me issue a spoiler alert at the top here. We are putting this episode out 2 weeks after the season finale of Superman and Lois, so people have had some time. But if you are listening to this and you haven't yet started or finished the season and you don't want to be spoiled, well, I never want to discourage anyone from listening or watching. Maybe you want to put this one off to the side while you catch up. This will be a spoiler discussion, and man, do we have a lot to talk about.
Oh boy.
Yeah. I also want to say one of the things we'll touch on is our predictions for season 4, which against all odds is happening. You know, the last 2 years I did an episode on season 1 and an episode on season 2, but I did them right before the next season was starting. And this time I assumed, given the change of ownership with the CW, their cancellation spree, their new direction, I was convinced. I said, there's no way there's going to be a 4th season. So why wait to do an episode? So I planned to do this right after, assuming this was going to be a farewell. And it's not, thankfully. I mean, I'm happy about that, but crazy.
Absolutely. And do you know what? Like, as much as people are kind of cheering and praising everyone for bringing it back, it is fascinating to me that the whole mechanics of why it was going to get cancelled. So for anyone who doesn't know, Warner Brothers is no longer the majority shareholder. I'm sorry, I'll wrap this up very quickly because for a lot of people this might not be very interesting. But
no,
Warner
listen,
Brothers,
I was only taking a coffee just so I'm going to make sure that I'm ready to go for the hour and a half or 2 hours that we do. But no, I'm glad that you're talking about this. I think it's important. I find it fascinating. Please.
Yeah, so Warner Brothers are no longer the majority shareholder in the CW, and what this means is that the revenue they were previously getting from these shows wasn't coming from the broadcast ratings. It was coming from the way they would sell them on to streamers later on. So they'd sell Arrow and Supergirl and all these things to streamers like Netflix for a bunch of money. And now Warner Brothers no longer have a majority share in the CW. I don't know if that has anything to do with Mr. Zaslav or any of his kind of shenanigans. But this company called Nexstar now own a majority share. And they're kind of going, well, hang on a second. These super duper shows that cost a lot of money and don't rate very well, they don't make us any money. So why should we prop them up? And it's like, being honest about it, it's a perfectly reasonable reason to, and it's a bad situation for us as fans to be in because everyone's kind of pointing at these companies and going, oh, greed, and you know, it's such a great show. Why would you cancel it? And actually, when you look at it in brass tacks, it makes complete sense. And that's why it's so much more miraculous to me that they did manage to work something out and that it is coming back. And my understanding is that now the CW are going to have a certain amount of rights in terms of being able to stream it after the fact. So usually Warner Brothers would own the show wholesale afterwards, but now the CW are going to hold on to it for a little bit longer or something. I think that's the mechanics of how they've managed to justify paying to bring it back. But I just think it's great that this has happened, and I'm surprised that it did.
I echo all of that, and I thank you for laying that out. And I was familiar with most of that, not the piece about this new deal that they've worked out with potentially hanging on to it longer. That's very interesting, and that definitely makes sense. As far as why this would be more attractive to them.
I should stress, though, that it's the streaming rights. It's not to say that the show will last longer or anything like that. I think it's just that in exchange for another season, they will be able to stream it for a little bit longer on the CW player, I think is the kind of the agreement.
Gotcha.
But
I'll
I
say
think all in all, though, like, it's just fascinating that, the corporate mechanisms that lead to these things existing at all are the same things that can lead to them being destroyed, and I think we really, it's important as fans sometimes to actually recognize that there are mechanical reasons for why these things happen and don't happen, and it can make it easier when they finally do go away. I think, if you kind of accept the real world reasons for it.
very true. But I was as surprised as anyone, especially during the upfront presentations. They delayed their decision on this show and some others for a while. And I remember an interview with the head of the new head of the CW talking about basically all the reasons why this wouldn't potentially come back. They hadn't made a decision, but they were talking about how expensive the show is to produce compared to the rest on the network. So it really seemed to be pointing towards this is not going to happen. And then we got the surprise news that it's back for a 10-episode fourth season. And we were all basking in that for a little while. There was the initial news hand in hand with that report that the budget was going to be reduced. We might see less in the way of special effects, more leaning into the family drama, maybe some cast reductions. And then we got the confirmation that basically none of the supporting cast will be back as series regulars, but our quartet of the Kent family will be regulars, as will Michael Cutlitz as Lex Luthor. And the door is open for the others to come back. And I guess that's an open question. We'll see to what extent that happens based on availability and pay and all sorts of stuff.
I would say as well, though, like, there is only 10 episodes. And my understanding is that at least some of the actors, some of the regulars that are no longer regulars, some of them have been signed on for at least 3 episodes next season. And that could change. That there could be more. There could be, so I honestly do think if they shuffle them around well enough, you may not even notice that some of them aren't regulars. Would be so. The other thing I would say to that is, part of the pitfall of these CW shows has always been, sometimes I feel like, that they have this cast of actors and everyone has to have a storyline, or else we're not getting our money's worth. So every week, Kyle has to have a storyline, Lana has to have a storyline. So it might be no harm that we can kind of space them out a little bit more and let things breathe a bit more. Maybe it's just wishful thinking, but that thought had kind of crossed my mind where, you have a show like The Sopranos and certain characters might not be around for entire seasons at a time, and then they'll just suddenly come back. Whereas a show like this, it feels like they have to use everybody every single week or they're not getting their money's worth. So I think there might be a positive side to that as well.
All right. I appreciate your optimism.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I'm pessimistic. I don't know if I'm quite where you are, but I appreciate that. Your points are well taken. It's funny because right after that news came out, I pretty quickly saw on Twitter there was a contingent of folks who were happy that the Cushings in particular wouldn't be back as regulars. And to me, and I've talked about this every time we've talked about Superman and Lois, and it's like, no, that group of characters and Chrissy, all of our non-powered characters, make this show special and make this show stand apart. It's why I eventually soured on most of the rest of the Arrowverse. Everyone was part of the super team, and it just lost that, for me, that human element. And to me, that perspective, the role that all of these characters play, give the show its flavor, its texture. And so, yeah, I hope that they all pop up to some degree or another. According to Dylan Walsh's wife, he's out, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Hopefully he pops up too.
That was unfortunate. I did read that, and we'll get into that. But like, of everyone, he's the guy that really, we really need to see kind of things progress there a bit, But I feel like that might have been said,
Heat of the moment.
Like, things could change. They could get him back. They could do anything. They could do a phone call, whatever. Remember as well, there was episodes of, I want to say season 2, some of the episodes that were filmed in the height of COVID, where Dylan Walsh clearly wasn't there. He was like in front of a green screen, and he was probably back in California. Like, they could still do that, So
Very
I don't
true.
know.
Very true. Well, in the meantime, we are here to unpack the just concluded third season, not the final season, third season of Superman and Lois, which was 2 episodes less than the first 2. It was 13 episodes. And a lot going on, as always, but the heart of our season was Lois and Clark investigating Bruno Mannheim, the leader of Intergang, while Lois is fighting for her life, battling breast cancer. And a truly harrowing, emotional, deeply personal story that I was very surprised by. And I want to get your take and talk about all of this. I guess just big picture, how did you like this season? And how did it live up to the first two for you?
So for anyone who's listening, we did an episode on season one. We never got around to doing an episode on season two. This is my favorite live action version of Superman since the 1990s, since Lois and Clark. I'm wearing a Lois and Clark t-shirt right now.
Nice.
That is my favorite Superman show, Lois and Clark, and for the simple reason that that show, the characters, even if the stories didn't feel entirely convincing or good, the characters always felt completely real, and the journeys they went on felt authentic and honest. And Superman and Lois, for me, is the first version since then where that is true. The characters just feel so real and honest, and it's honest in a way that's true to the heart of the characters from the comics, but it doesn't shy away from kind of ambitious character development. And this season especially has just nailed it for me from start to finish. And I can honestly say it's one of the best pieces of DC media I've seen. And to your point about the cancer story, that could have been disastrous. Like, it could have been so badly done. And we've seen enough examples of that on other CW shows in the past. And indeed, any of these kind of genre shows where someone will get a life threatening illness and a magic cure will come along, and they'll have some cliched run around where, such and such happens. Like, they've done it on Supernatural so many times. And, I can think of at least one example on Supergirl. Smallville, I think, did stuff like that at some stage, but that was not this at all. Like, the care and the attention to detail they took in terms of how breast cancer is treated, and it just never felt exploitative. It always felt in service of the story and the characters and the real world illness and how it is dealt with. And I was blown away. And my partner Saoirse, who is kind of, she was on she was on my review of The Flash. She's kind of become indoctrinated into the world of Superman. And when we started this series initially, she kind of wasn't really sure what to make of it. But as the series has gone on, it's become her favorite version of Superman. And there were episodes of this, and we'll get into it. There were moments of episodes of this where we were both turning to each other and going, "Oh," like, we were just blown away by it. So I was really, really pleased with this season. Absolutely.
It was so strong and surprising. We've talked
Yeah.
about this before. I think that looking at those first two seasons, you saw what appeared to be a pattern emerging, where
Mm.
in the first season we have what we think is going to be our villain for the season, Captain Luthor, and then we get the bait and switch. It's John Henry Irons.
Yeah.
Amazing. Then it happens again at the start of season two, where it looks like we're getting Doomsday. And, Death of Superman fan over here. I'm like, yes. And then we get the bait and switch, and it's Bizarro. And I didn't get as much mileage out of that, yet it was in furtherance of the story. And even plot-wise, we saw it escalate. I was not the biggest fan of season two. I didn't dislike it, but all of the Ali
Yes.
Alston inverse world business kind of grew tiresome for me. But it seemed like, again, we were getting these bait and switches. We were escalating the stakes and the scope each season. And so when this one started, after that season premiere where Lois gets the call from the doctor that something's up, my immediate thought was, and I said this to my wife and I said this to other Superman fans, I was like, I'm assuming that Dr. Irons faked the diagnosis. It's to throw her off and impede her investigation into Bruno Mannheim, and she won't actually be sick, because I did not think that they would go where they did. And I'm happy that I was wrong. And I agree with what you said totally. And that's what I kept thinking of, the attention to detail and the authenticity. You really got the sense that either the people on the writing staff have experienced this themselves, or at the very least talk to people who have gone through this, because it just felt very real and very lived in. All of these sort of the ebbs and flows, right? Just the cycle of getting the diagnosis, dealing with it, making a plan, accepting it, going through the treatment, dealing with all of the effects. They got as specific as talking about their sex life and whether or not this is something that she would be able to do, be interested in doing. And you see them reconnect in an intimate way in the finale. And it was very powerful. I really tip my hat to them for getting into it the way they did.
That scene you're talking about where they're discussing their sex life and how it might be impacted by this, and if they're going to even want to have sex after it, and all this, and again, it just could have been so badly done, but the acting was so good, the chemistry between the two actors, and we'll get into the two of them maybe later. But I just think Tyler Hoechlin has gone from strength to strength on this show. But that moment where Clark kind of says, this is going to happen and we're going to find a way to deal with it, it's just, to me, it's one of the most adult Superman scenes there's ever been, and it was just so true to Superman in the best possible way. And that was the scene where I kind of turned to Saoirse and went, "Oh my god, I can't believe how good this is! I can't believe that this exists. Who is it for? Like, are they writing this for me?" Because I'm at that age now where I've kind of grown up with different versions of Superman, and this, to me, more than any other version, feels like a version of Superman that is specifically for adults, but that isn't for adults in a way where it's trying to be gritty and it's trying to be, push the boat out in terms of what they can get away with in terms of violence or anything like that. It's adult in terms of the challenges they're facing and how they're dealing with them. And Clark's arc this year, for me, it felt like, Superman's whole thing is, oh, well, there's always a way, and, we'll always be able to save the day no matter what. And what was so brilliant about his arc this season was he had to learn that, well, people die, and that's something that Superman can't stop. And there is nobility and strength and honor and heroism in being brave enough to accept that and actually let go and give the person the dignity to pass. And as the season dragged on, we see Pia die and Superman comes to that conclusion. I just thought that is so effortlessly done, so well done. And when you contrast that, we recorded an episode on Up in the Sky recently, which is a magnificent comic. But there is a scene in that where Superman is presented with someone who is in tremendous pain and wants to die. And it seems like Superman, sorry to spoil this for anyone who's, it seems like Superman helps them do that. And you think, wow, like that's a really noble thing for Superman to do. And then at the end of the story, the guy's alive again and Superman magically found a cure. I'm like, that's, if you're going to deal with these things, really deal with them. And this show, I think, handled that so much better. I don't know how you feel.
No, I feel the same way. I think I said the same thing when we talked about it too, where I felt like with that Up in the Sky story, I bumped up against that as well, where it just felt like exactly everything that you just said. Then it's fine, and I guess it fit in with what that story was trying to do. But as I was reading it, if nothing else, I thought maybe they could have, I don't know, split the difference and left it up to some measure of interpretation. I would have been okay with that. And it's like, okay, look, if you want to believe he found a way because he's Superman and he always finds a way, great. And if you want to look at it as, hey, sometimes there is this reality that he has to accept and he is able and willing to do that, you can look at it that way too. So no, I love the way this played out here. It's funny because my mother watches this show. She doesn't watch a ton. Yeah, she doesn't watch a ton of superhero stuff. She watched Lois and Clark though in the 90s. She watched the George Reeves show in the 50s, or when she was in syndication in subsequent decades. not that old, but she watched Lois and Clark and watched a little bit of Smallville, when I was younger, but never got all in on it. And she's been watching this, and she hasn't finished the season yet, but we've talked about this storyline, and she's basically said, why are they doing this? Like, why do you think they're doing this? And I said, I think, well, for one thing, it poses a new challenge, right? And we can get very deep and very personal. I said, but more than anything, going back to the classic scene from Superman the movie, just this idea of, for all of the power that he has, this is not something that he can fix the way he fixes his other problems. And so he has to go through this process with his wife. And I think that's what this shows. I will say, and I don't want to get nerdy and fanboyish about this, the one thing about this season that...
I think I'm going to agree with you. Go ahead.
About the Kryptonian tech?
Yep.
Yeah.
What the heck was that?
That was a misstep, I feel, where the boys are really pushing Clark to use the Kryptonian technology in the fortress to help Lois. And we get this answer from Clark that it perhaps could help Lois.
Yeah.
But then they would have to share that with the rest of the world, and the world isn't ready for that advanced science. Right? What was, you had the same reaction?
Yeah, it just felt like they were addressing something, number one, that didn't need to be addressed, like just hand wave it. And number two, if that power can be shared with the world to cure cancer, like, you should be spending every hour of every day finding a way to make that work, as Superman has done in the comics. It was just really threw me out of it. I was like, what? Like, why did they say that? Like, Yeah, that did bother me. And there's kind of lots of little bits and pieces of kind of the Superman side of things about this show that do bother me. And but they're kind of fanboy nitpicks, and then some of them like that, you're kind of going, well, no, that goes against the nature of the character that they're presenting to us. Like another example would be that I don't like this whole thing where Superman is kind of working with the Department of Defense all the time. It doesn't really play as well outside of America as I think it does within the United States. And I think if they had kind of fictionalized that department up a little bit more than they have, like for example in Supergirl, it was the Department of Extra Normal Operations. They made it more of a comic booky thing, but by having guys in army fatigues, you know, giving Superman orders, it's never really quite sat right with me. And I know they've grappled with that and they've tried to tease it out, but ultimately they've kind of circled right back to it. There's lots of little bits, and then there's lots of little Kryptonian bits and pieces that sort of don't really work for me either. But I think the stuff that the show gets right, the characters and the family drama and the contrast between the Kent's marriage and Lana's marriage and all that kind of stuff, that more than makes up for those kind of more comic booky complaints that I have, if that makes sense.
I agree. But I also agree with you about the DoD. And as someone in America, though I can't speak for everyone, I don't like that aspect either. I don't like the whole idea of it's funny because later on when Lex and Superman have their confrontation, he calls him a lapdog in a cape. And it's like, yeah, he
is. Like,
yeah, I've never really liked that. And it is interesting where in season 2, obviously Sam had retired and then you had Mitch Anderson and you saw that tension and you saw how, oh, this probably isn't going to work. And then, of course, they put Sam right back in there and he's calling Superman in. And it's just, I would have preferred definitely a more removed relationship, maybe some cooperation, but not quite this level of involvement.
Yeah.
Like you said, it doesn't ruin the show for me or anything like that, but I don't love that aspect of it. But with the Kryptonian technology, yeah, that really drove me nuts on a number of levels. I do appreciate that they addressed it, right? This question of, hey, could we use, is there science in the fortress that could help her? I'm glad they at least brought that up. It's a reasonable question for the boys in particular to have. My thing is, like you said, we've seen instances like All-Star Superman, for example, where he cures cancer. So this idea of we'd have to share it, but we can't sort of thing, I don't really buy that. But honestly, even more than that, and this might just be, this probably is me just sort of glomming my sense of morality onto Superman, and I know he's the ideal, but it's like if that were my wife and I had the means to help her, even if I was convinced I couldn't share it with anyone else and it was selfish, I would be selfish for her. Like that was the thing where it just kind of it didn't ring true for me on either side. Like no matter how, which track you take, it didn't add up for me.
And again, it's like there's such an easy out in that. I think initially it was implied that, well, if we used any of this technology, it wouldn't be compatible with human DNA and it would make her die quicker or something. It's like, there you go. Just say that.
Yes.
Or do an entire episode where Clark tries to find a way to make it work and it can't. And there's this really heartbreaking moment where Lara has to tell him, I'm sorry, son, there's nothing I can do. Like, that's perfect. That's a perfect way to move the story along, in a way that addresses these kind of fanboy concerns without kind of being counterfeit to the reality of what Lois is going through, but it felt very strange. It felt like maybe it was a last minute rewrite or something that maybe DC Comics made them do, or one of these weird kind of contractual kind of IP related things. I just didn't like that. And it really stood out to me throughout the whole season. I was like, that was a weird moment.
I know. Every time we were, and this was a driving force of the season. And every time we were in those scenes with the treatment, I just kept thinking about that. It really bugged me. Now, audience, you might be saying, I can't believe he hasn't talked about Doomsday yet. We're getting there. Oh, yeah. Here's the thing. I wanted to launch right into Doomsday, but the cancer storyline was so powerful and really was what the season was about. And so I didn't want to get on the Doomsday train and lose sight of that. So there's still a lot more for us to talk about, but I have to tell you, even more so than the Kryptonian tech piece, do you want to know, I think what bothered me more than anything this entire season, Rob?
Okay.
How friggin' old is George Jr., Mayor Jr., whatever his name was?
Oh, yeah. He looks like 40.
That guy. And on top of everything, right? Junior, but what was the mayor's name? George. It was George Dean.
I can't remember. Yeah, something. Yeah.
Right? This guy, this drove me nuts every time he's on screen. And on top of everything, they had the gall to do an underage drinking episode. It's like you did an episode that just calls attention to the fact that this guy looks vastly older than
And if
anyone
I'm
else
not
on the
mistaken,
show.
on top of looking so much older, he's also so obviously Canadian in a way that none of the other actors are. He's all about his boots and his, all those kind of Canadianisms that I don't know if you listen to Talkville. They're always kind of
Yes.
complaining about the Canadian day players that would stop by the set and would have these bit parts, and you can always tell their accents. That really stood out to me as well. But yeah, and they're pretty good with the actors looking the age they're supposed to be in this. A lot more than Smallville was. But yeah, no, that guy, he looks older than me.
I know, I think about that all the time. They did really do a great job with the casting, because you look at Jordan and John, and they're the age that Tom Welling is, like, their characters are the age that Tom Welling's Clark was supposed to be at the start of Smallville. And it's like,
Yeah.
you compare them, and yeah, Tom Welling, like this grown man from the start, whereas these feel like teenagers, but not Junior. This guy, there was one, I don't mean to belabor the point, but there was maybe his last episode. I literally paused it in the middle. I was like, I have to look him up. And do you want to know something funny?
Go
His age isn't listed.
on.
And I
Oh,
couldn't find it anywhere. I went to his IMDb. There's not much on him generally. I don't know that he's done a ton of stuff, but that just added fuel to the fire there. It's like, what are you hiding here, man? How old are you?
that's so funny.
Not the best casting there, but in any event, again, there's a lot to talk about on the way to the finale, but the finale gave us Doomsday, turned Bizarro into Doomsday, and gave us the Superman Doomsday live action fight that I have been waiting for 30 years. I can't tell you how happy and excited I was during that finale. How did you feel as it was unfolding?
I as soon as Lex said,
He's growing.
If you keep dying, you grow stronger each time. I was like, oh, hey, I see what they're doing here. It was delightful. It was a lot of fun, and the whole way watching it through, I was just remembering the episode you did with Zach about the Smallville season 8 finale, and I was going, those guys are going to be delighted, because it is far truer to the source material and the scale of that fight in the source material. And you know what? I went to see The Flash a couple of weeks ago. Those special effects were as good or better than that. Only thing, purely from a comic book fanboy perspective side of things, this whole thing where Doomsday has powers and he has heat vision and all that sort of stuff, didn't like it in BVS. Not crazy about it here. I did, however, really like the idea that the Bizarro suit was kind of like blended into his body, almost like he'd absorbed it, and that the S was kind of bulging out of his chest. It was an interesting look for the character, and I hope it was a Superman 4 reference that they ended up fighting on the moon. I thought that was cool. All in all, though, the finale, to me, it did feel a little bit like they were worried they were going to get cancelled, and they were worried that this would be the last episode. So they were kind of hurrying along with certain things. And the Doomsday thing, as much as I enjoyed watching it, and I went to get another beer as soon as I knew Doomsday was coming, I said, this is going to be great. And I smiling from ear to ear. It was a lot of fun. It felt a little bit more bought than earned, if that makes sense. Whereas everything that throughout the season with Bruno Mannheim and Onomatopoeia and all that stuff, like, it all came from the characters, whereas Lex Luthor just suddenly came out of nowhere, and then Doomsday suddenly kind of came out of nowhere as well. Now, it was great entertainment, and I'm so grateful that they did it. That was maybe my only, just that certain things kind of felt a little bit kind of accelerated in a way that I would have liked to see them kind of develop out over season 4, if that makes sense.
I hear you. I don't dispute that. It definitely was not in keeping with the rest of this season.
Yeah.
Like, this season was so much more grounded, so much smaller in scale, and so personal that I've been burned now multiple times when it comes to Doomsday. So I, in no way, shape, or form was I expecting Doomsday. It looked like we were going to get some version of a Bizarro rematch, and I kind of
Yeah.
figured that would be kind of our spectacle in the finale, right? Because just to have,
And I would have been fine with that.
yeah. But this didn't bug me. I will take it. And yes, I did that episode with our pal Zach on Always Hold On to Smallville. Almost 3 hours. We talked about the that Doomsday quote unquote fight from the season 8 finale of Smallville. He and I were messaging, and I was like, he was like, "Oh man, if only we had known this was coming on Superman and Lois." And I said, we definitely would have passed the 3 hour mark if we had known. So it's probably
Yeah.
better that we didn't. But all I could think of was that Smallville finale, which aired just over 14 years ago. And I won't rehash the whole thing, but that was a season of expectation about what this
Yes.
final confrontation would be like. And it was so short and so anticlimactic, and it has haunted me until I did that episode with Zach. And I put a lot of that to rest. I got it out of my system. And then it was just this moment of redemption where we got this fight. And you know what? And this is the thing. It came out of nowhere in the context of this season, but you know what? I was still there for
Why
it.
not?
And look,
Yeah.
it's the exact flip of Smallville. Smallville they built it up for a season and then gave you next to nothing. This show made you think all you got was that little tease at the beginning of season 2. And then all of a sudden they give you the Doomsday that you always wanted here. And it's funny. It was right when Lex noticed that Bizarro was growing. When he said he's growing.
Yeah.
My poor wife, the whole last chunk of the show, I said, he's growing, like they're doing Doomsday. Like I was losing it. I was so excited. Now, here's the other thing, because I've been burned before. And let me also say just real quick, because people know I am a big fan of the Snyder movies. That being said, I don't love the Doomsday, the look or
That makes
whole
two of us.
Yeah. I get the purpose that it served and all of that. But that fight didn't really scratch that itch for me either. So when I say this is the fight that I've always longed for, it really was. But again, I've been burned before that. Even when it was starting to unfold, my expectations were still really low.
Yeah.
Like how far did you think it was going to go? Because there were a couple of points along the way where it looks like it stopped, and I really bought. And the thing is, I've been burned so badly before, like when Superman impales Bizarro on that pole at the top of the building. Honestly, after Smallville, I was like, okay, like that's probably
right. Yeah.
That aside, just watching this episode, of course, like there's going to be a twist and more is going to come. But again, I've really been burned. So I was like, okay, that's probably what did you think as you were watching it? Like, how far did you think they were going to go?
As soon as they landed in Smallville, I was kind of like, okay, so maybe this is going to be a little bit more of a grounded kind of punching match as opposed to a big epic global brawl, and then they went underground. They went underwater at some stage. They ended up in Metropolis. I suppose as well, I knew you could sense throughout the season that they were scaling all the Superman stuff back a bit. So I kind of went, okay, well, this is the season finale. They've obviously saved up a bit of money. This could really be something, and it really, really was. And I'm kind of controversially, I'm one of those people that actually kind of likes a cliffhanger ending, where you kind of end on the two punches, like Rocky 3, the two
You and I
just
are on the
hit
same
each other.
page. We're on the same page.
That was a perfect way to end it. I wasn't kind of going, oh, I wish we'd seen the rest of the fight. I was like, that's actually, and if the show had ended there, I'd be fine with it. It was a perfect conclusion, and it was great. And the CGI was just really satisfying. It was more than above average. Like, it was for a TV show, and not even a streaming show, like a traditional broadcast television show, that whoever designed that and animated all that, they should be very, very proud, because it was very satisfying to watch. It was great.
I know, not to keep beating up on the Flash, but it's just like you see what this big budget motion picture was able to do compared to this. It's like, are you kidding me? But no, I am so glad you said that about the cliffhanger, because that's what I felt as well. That Rocky 3 freeze frame finish. It's like, oh, again, I'm glad that we're getting another season, but there is a part of me that's like, I would really be okay. And people might be like, what are you guys talking about? But I don't know, just let it sit with you for a minute, because I think there's something really, really cool about that, especially because Clark already won. In that moment where Doomsday is dragging him into space, and he's he's unconscious and he's seemingly down for the count. And Lois whispers to him. And then we see all of the flashes. And of course, no flashes of his time as Superman, except the moment where he's holding Jordan, right? It's all he's thinking about are the moments with his family, because that's who he is, right? Ultimately at his core. And that's what re-energizes him and revives him. And he's won in that moment. So I feel like it's not like, oh my God, we don't know what's going to happen. We know what's going to happen. Even if he dies at the hands of Doomsday, he'll come back. But in any event, it's like he already won. So I actually would have been okay with that kind of finish.
And it's such a beautiful subversion of what happened in the comics, because if you remember in the Death of Superman comic, he's flying towards Doomsday and it's implied that he has this moment where he might be able to beat him, but then he hears a cry for help and his humanity forces him to go back and save, and it badly impacts his ability to beat Doomsday as the fight goes on. Whereas in this moment, it's actually his humanity that gives him the strength to, as you say, re-energize and get back in the fight. So it's a lovely kind of bringing the comics full circle. Really, really nice moment.
No, that's a great point. And again, I think just speaks to the character generally, and especially as presented on the show. He's had a big life. He's had the biggest life out of anyone in existence, the things he's seen, the places he's gone. But in the end, it's those quiet moments, those small moments with his family. That's what matter to him. So here's the other thing too. We don't know what the fourth season is going to bring. And hopefully it's great. And hopefully we're like, oh, I'm so glad that they did a fourth season. And again, I don't mean to be pessimistic, but there is a part of me that foresees a scenario where we end up with a season 4 that, especially due to these budget cuts in terms of cast, in terms of effects, whatever the case may be, where, and I hope this doesn't prove true, but you can't help but wonder if we get to a point where it's like, oh man, that it kind of lost a little bit of the magic. I almost wish that we had just ended on that face-off on the moon, and kind of knowing that the rest of the characters were all, well, except for Sam. He's the only one whose fate was really left up in the air. But again, hopefully it doesn't get to that point, but I am with you. There's really something kind of appealing about the Rocky 3 finish.
Yeah, and I mean, I do echo that. Remember, there's a writer strike on at the moment as well, so they can't even plan what they want to do. Like, there are a lot of cards stacked against season 4 right now. But I think, the combination of this show and its precarious future, and then films like The Flash that are kind of just begging you to remember things that are far, far in the past, it's really just made me appreciate that when these things are good, appreciate them while they're there, and stop thinking about the future, stop thinking about the past, just enjoy it in the moment. And while I was watching that finale, I was like, God, I'm so grateful this show exists. And it wasn't my favorite episode of the season by any stretch, but it was just another really strong hour of Superman that felt like it was made for me, and it just really hit me the right way, and I was just so grateful. And to anyone who's kind of worried about not just the future of this show, but the future of DC in general, just if there is a version of the character that you like that's going on now, celebrate it and enjoy it and love it, because it won't be around forever. And that's kind of how I'm approaching this show. I'm trying not to think about the day that it gets bad or the day that it gets canceled, because either of those two things could happen,
No, that's a great point. I tweeted this after, because I was really basking in the glow of this finale and this Doomsday moment. And again, just this sense of redemption after that Smallville debacle. And I said, it's like the arc of being a Superman fan. It can be very frustrating at times, for all of the reasons that we've talked about on all of our podcasts and we tweeted about and all that kind of stuff. But the arc of being a Superman fan is long, but it bends towards awesomeness. Like eventually, and this Doomsday thing was such a good example of that, where, a decade and a half since that frustrating Smallville finale. And then to be here in that moment, here's the other funny thing too, and I must have said this on some episode, but I can't remember. As much as I have such attachment to the Death of Superman story, and if they're going to bring in Doomsday, I want it done right. At the same time, it's not like I enjoy seeing my favorite character getting beaten to death. So it's this weird kind of mix of emotions where, as I'm watching this, I'm like, oh, they're finally doing it. But it's like, oh, but I don't want to see this poor guy just get thrashed. So there were points along the way, like yourself, when they start the battle in Smallville on the farm. I really thought that was going to be our setting for it. And I was okay with that. That was one of the things I said when we talked about Smallville. It's like, look, if you didn't have the budget, like, just do it in the woods, do it in a warehouse, like, keep it small, but you could still do something. So I thought that was going to be it. And then we moved to Metropolis. And like I said, when Doomsday's impaled, I thought, okay, it's a little anticlimactic, but it's still more than we've gotten before. I'm okay with that. And then when Doomsday comes down, then I was getting worried. It's like, oh no, like, are they just going to kill Clark? But it's like, no, they can't
Yeah.
kill Clark and still have Doomsday out there. Right. So
No.
that made me feel okay. But there was this sense of for both, like, and that's what I want to say. I give them a lot of credit because so much of the time, especially for us, where we watch all of this stuff, we study all of this, we dissect it, we talk about it, we predict it, we're reading articles. I feel like it's hard to surprise us a lot of the time, or
Absolutely.
even if we are surprised for a second, we kind of have a sense, okay, we know kind of know how it's gonna go. But there was that moment. There was like, oh, I really don't know, and I don't get that feeling a lot. And it was really cool.
Yeah, that's true actually. Like it really wasn't until that moment that Lex said that where I was kind of going, "Oh wow, Doomsday is about to happen," you know? It was very, very surprising.
Yeah,
And on the topic of that though, one thing that I almost wish was a surprise was Lex Luthor being in it at all.
I'm with you. That's actually, so I have some patron questions that we'll get to in a little bit, but that was one of them. Do you wish that they had kept Lex's appearance a surprise? Yeah. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's like I get it to an extent. They got to sell the show. They want people to tune in, but they announced his casting so early, and we
Mm.
didn't know exactly when in the season it was going to happen. So kind of all along the way, it's like, oh, I wonder when Lex is going to pop up. And it's not until these last couple of episodes. I agree, man. I think if they had just kept that under wraps, that would have been such a cool surprise. Because the other thing too is, and we haven't even talked about Bruno yet, played by Chad Coleman.
Yeah,
I love this villain. I love the actor.
absolutely.
And I feel like maybe to some extent it took a little bit away because you still had the specter of Lex hanging over everything. And when's Lex going to show up? And it's like, no, like just focus on Bruno. This is very compelling here. So yeah, I think they should have kept it a secret.
I've written that down. Like it kind of undermined him a little bit because he was so engaging and it was such an interesting story. But every time you mentioned Lex, you were like, "Oh, Lex is going to be in it now." um, so yeah, like and I what did you say the actor's name was? Apologies, I've forgotten it already.
Oh,
The actor
Bruno,
who played Bruno.
Chad Coleman from Walking Dead, and he's also. Do you watch Always Sunny? It's Always Sunny in
I
Philadelphia.
have done, yeah. I don't watch it, but I have seen it a lot. Yeah, yeah.
Because he has a recurring part in that. I actually forget his
Mm,
name offhand, but he's just like this insane, as everyone is on that show, but
yeah.
so hilarious. And then of course, yeah, he was Tyrese on Walking Dead for a while, but yeah, he was tremendous in this.
Really, really good. And just, and in a lot of ways, he kind of reflected the Lex Superman animosity. Like that there was those great scenes where Superman would fly into his office that were very reminiscent of not only the animated series, but also Lois and Clark and the comics, and that there was the exploring the whole, he was mainly a mobster, but there was white collar crime in there as well. And I really, really liked how they kind of made it a little bit more of a gray area in terms of, well, I do all these criminal activities, but they pay for this, experimental medical facility that's saving all these lives. And, the reason I'm a criminal is because of all these horrible socioeconomic reasons that are, Superman doesn't really deal with. And just really, really lovely three-dimensional portrait of, and it was such a grounded villain compared to, you mentioned Ali Alston. I lost interest in that very quickly in season 2. That felt like it could have been a 3-part episode and it was stretched out of the whole season. Talrow in season 1, a lot of fun. I really, really did grow to like that character, but it's been done. It's cliched. This really felt fresh and grounded and character driven, and it just reminded me how much I almost prefer Superman stories when they're a little bit more scaled back and it isn't about universes crashing into each other, and it's more just about investigative journalism. And Superman only shows up when a bridge falls and he needs to catch it. Really, really enjoyed it. And you know what, like everything they did with Pia contrasting with Lois, um and then Mateo, if I could point at one thing that I kind of thought was predictable, it was as soon as Mateo showed up, I was kind of like, oh well, he's obviously Bruno's son, and there's going to be a Romeo and Juliet romance here, and it's going to end up with the two dads fighting, and that's exactly what happened. But I can forgive them that because everything else was so well done.
I agree with you. And look, the show has trained us, and when someone shows up, it's always, well, who are they? Who are they really? And yeah, it was not a huge stretch to put that together. And the way when they make that quote unquote reveal in that episode that
Mm.
that Bruno and Pierre are his parents, it's like, all right, come on, guys, did you really think we
Yeah.
wouldn't see this? But yeah, again, I can get over that. No, he was. Look, we whenever we talk about these comic book shows and movies, and we talk about the villains, there are varying degrees of effectiveness, and I feel like this depiction of Bruno Mannheim was far and away one of the more effective ones that we've seen in these stories because of how compelling his motivations were and how understandable. And yes, we get the backstory and we see how he and Pia took power and how they murdered the bosses of
Mm.
Intergang and they pinned it on Lex, and even in the present day as they're experimenting on these individuals and they've stolen Clark's blood and they're going about that business. Yeah, it's not great, but at the same time he's trying to save his wife. And to your point, like there's this whole larger picture about what he's trying to do for his community, an
Yeah.
underserved, overlooked community, including by Superman himself. So there's a lot there that really tracks. And especially, look, what were we saying just a minute ago about how frustrated we were with Clark and his refusal to even entertain the notion of using the Kryptonian technology, right?
Yep.
I think there's something about Bruno where it's like, yeah, again, if that were my wife and I had the means, like I would do anything. So as this is unfolding, it's like, and there were points along the way where I turned to Steph, I was like, he might be the hero of the season here. I feel
Yeah.
like he's trying to cure cancer. So yeah, it was good. And I agree with you. I love all of those scenes in the office, on the balcony. Yes, it is so reminiscent of all of those Superman Lex moments
Yeah.
that we've gotten. It was such a great dynamic. And we got to see Clark doing a little investigative reporting as
Oh
well.
my goodness gracious. That is a consistent criticism I have of all these modern Superman shows is they kind of they leave the journalism to Lois. It's like, okay, understandably, we need to give Lois more of an agency in these modern versions. So the journalism is her thing. That's what she does. And then Clark ends up never doing it. Now, I know there's a whole thing in the Ultimate Edition of Batman versus Superman. Didn't really resonate with me, that whole subplot, I have to say. I appreciate that they included it. It just I was also disappointed in those, especially Man of Steel, that there wasn't more of a journalism presence in it. And it's a problem I've had with this series as well. It's like, why can Clark not be helping out a bit more? And to their credit, they do occasionally give him little bits and pieces to do in the Smallville Gazette, ladies and gentlemen. But that scene where he's interviewing Bruno, I was like, reporter Clark is back in business. It was such a strong scene. And again, Tyler Hoechlin was just killing it. And the whole time, he was so I was completely buying him as a journalist, and he was kind of antagonizing Bruno, but he always felt like Clark Kent. He never felt like Superman in that scene, which I really, really liked. And I, again, going back to the fanboy nitpicks, I have issues with how they handled the dual identity in this episode, but Hecklin's performance as Clark, I think, is second to none. He's so good as Clark, both as Clark the dad and especially in that particular scene, Clark the reporter. I just completely bought it, and I was so grateful that scene. And even the way they shot it was really, really good. They just had, it was all these tight shots on their face, and they go back and forth, and it was really, really good scene. Really like that.
Yeah, that was great. And I mean, the two of them playing off of each other. Again, Chad Coleman, just the intensity and the presence that he brought to it, and the way he talks to Superman in particular really stood out. It's like this the man with the powers of a god standing in front of you, and you're talking to him like he's nothing. And it just, again, it shows you exactly who this guy is and where he's coming from. And again, the more you learn about him and why he's doing the things he's doing, it's like, okay, yeah, you get it. Like nothing is going to stop him, and you understand it. And I agree with you. I'm always hesitant to sort of, I guess, give superlatives or rank the actors and things like that, because it's so it always depends on the specific context, and then there's the personal component. Like again, Smallville, it was so formative for me, so I always go to that. But both personally and really trying to be as objective as possible, I mean, this might be the most well-rounded, fully realized version of the character that we've gotten of Superman. I mean, in terms of, kind of getting to see, because I think this version, and look, in fairness, it is a Superman a little further down the line.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
But you get to see, I guess, a lot of the aspects of the character that have been represented before, but it's part of the larger package. And you have this added
Yes.
component of him as a father. And so it checks a lot of boxes, man. And it brings a lot together, I feel, in a strong way.
Mm.
Again, not that it's, again, Tom Welling's always going to be number one in my heart, but but I really feel like this version really, again, like ties a lot together when you look at the long view of the mythology.
If I could point to, and one of the things that has been missing for me throughout is that one of the main things they don't do in this show is the dual identity. I feel like there's been little bits of lip service paid to it in season 1, and then in season 2 they just told everybody a secret, so now they don't have to deal with it at all anymore. And where we're kind of left with now is a situation whereby Clark is in nearly every scene, and Superman is very rarely seen in the show. And when he is, his dialogue and his presence in the show is mainly kind of expository. Like he's really only there to say, "Sam, where do I need to go?" And so I don't really feel like we don't really talk enough about how the dual identity has played into his life and all that. I do feel like Lois and Clark did that a bit better, and I feel like that side of things was kind of a bit more rounded. And I understand why they shy away from all that stuff. First of all, it's ridiculous. We all know that. The second reason is it's hard to make your central character likable when he's developing all these friendships with people, but he's lying to them the whole time. So the writers are probably always thinking to themselves, okay, well, how are we going to get ourselves to a situation where we can tell Lana and we can tell Chrissy and we can tell Kyle and all these people so that we don't have to deal with this guilt anymore? you know that's the only crucial component of the stew that's missing for me. Is I just don't feel like they explore that enough of what it's actually like to lead a double life. And I feel like Superman kind of is literally a lapdog in a cape at this point in the show. Like there isn't enough of a personality difference there, but all the stuff with Clark again makes up for it. It's so good and it's so strong.
I hear you. And that's one of the things that I know Tyler and Bitsie have talked about. There was an interview recently about their hopes for season 4. And one or both of them talked about wanting to see more of their early days in Metropolis.
Oh yeah.
And that's one of the things, especially, they're two of a very small group of returning series regulars, and Lex will be a regular presence. My hope is that we will get more of those flashbacks, and maybe we'll get some of what you're hoping for. I would also like to see more of that in the present day as well. But
Yeah.
based on the way they've set up the show at this point and what we've seen so far, I don't know that they would do that. But if we spend more time and kind of see a little bit more about the development of their relationship, that initial reporting, the initial takedown of Luthor, I feel like that might be a good vehicle to kind of get into some of that. Because I agree. I mean, I think that's, and look, you talk about the Marvel movies and how they've completely turned away from the secret identities. It's like, no, there really is a place for it. And so, no, I can't disagree with that. I think that is something that is missing generally. And even on the show, like the fact that so many people now at this point, the entire cast of characters knows, I could do without that. I don't need every single person to know.
No, totally. And but what I will say to their credit was in this season, obviously Kyle finds out, and there's that moment where he confronts Chrissy, and they have that really cliched CW argument about, oh, I can't believe you would keep this from me. And I went, oh God, now they're going to break up and they're going to draw this out for the whole season like they do in every one of these CW shows. And to their credit, they didn't. He came back at the end of the episode and he said, you know what? I was a jerk. You had your reasons. That's fine. Let's move on. And I was so grateful that they did that.
Yeah, let's have a baby. No, that'll come later. I got to say, though, on the note of Kyle and Chrissy, the show gave us, I was very delighted by this. The show gave us a number of new character pairings, whether it was for a storyline or even just an individual episode. And I really appreciated it. The diner scene with Sam and Lana, when they're commiserating over getting back into the dating scene, it's like, that's great. I love stuff like that. And then they have that little passing exchange at the Gazette a little bit later, and they reference that. And that's wonderful. I love stuff like that. Having Jonathan get involved with the Smallville Fire Department and getting trained and hazed by Kyle and company, and getting those Jonathan and Kyle scenes. Like, I thought that was great. The Kyle and Chrissy unexpected romantic pairing, I thought that ended up working really well. So putting different combinations of characters together was something that I very much enjoyed this season. And it looks like we have a little bit of a freeze here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back. And we're back, and Rob is back here with us. So yeah, let's pick up where we left off, these unexpected character pairings.
Yeah, and do you know what? One of the real masterstrokes of this season in particular was it didn't really feel like there was any character who I didn't like to be around. And I think the Kyle and Chrissy pairing from the first episode of season 3, I was kind of like, oh, that's nice. I like that. You know, I like those two characters together. And it really helped us to know and appreciate them a little bit more than just being these offshoots of the source material. Like Kyle is obviously Lana's husband, so we have to care about him, and Chrissy is the editor of the newspaper, so we have to care about her. Where suddenly we actually care about them as people, and I really really liked it. And you know, we sort of alluded to this in our season 1 review of our show, All Star Superfan. We talked about season 1, and we kind of said that Kyle is very much in the mold of Brad Wilson from Superman 3. And I feel like they definitely consciously had that in their minds when they designed him as a character. And he's really moved beyond that. He's just this great guy and this great man, and he's still a little bit impulsive sometimes, I think. But just really, really liked everything they did with him this season. And as you said earlier on, it's so important that you have those kind of grounded human characters that aren't these kind of perfect paragons like Superman to kind of contrast and compare with these other characters. It really grounds the show in a great way. And I hope that if the show does continue on past season 4, they never kind of go, geez, you know, we must give Kyle powers, you know, which too many of these shows have done.
Yeah, no, I've always been a Kyle defender, and it's funny because it's like you see and I give them a lot of credit because you see the growth, but then still that boneheadedness occasionally. Like in the finale, a perfect example. He finds out that Chrissy's pregnant. He steps up. He has a very mature conversation with Lana about it. I did think it was a little odd that it was a family discussion. I feel like that would have
kids.
Yeah, I feel like you break the news to your ex-wife first. Then you have your family meeting. Like, that was, maybe they were just trying to move things along quickly, but that just felt like, yeah, maybe you don't do this in a group setting. But then he proposes to Chrissy in front of the whole town without talking to Lana first. So, you know, again, I guess he felt like she gave her blessing and that was enough. But clearly she had a reaction to that. So, but you know, it's all right. And I have to say, it was great when he finally did confront Clark. Right, he's convinced that Jonathan has powers. Of course, it's Jordan, and they're having this He's, you know, Kyle and Clark are having this confrontation on the Kent front lawn, and Clark has to go, right, and Kyle like tries to push him, and immediately is sent back, and he has this realization, and you know, he was the last one, other than Sophie, I guess, but he's the last one who didn't know, but he took it in stride. I liked it.
My theory with Sophie, by the way, has always been that, you know, with these kind of teen-centric shows, there comes a point where the teenage characters age out and they have to go to college. So Sophie, who rarely appears on the show, she's kind of the writers kind of investing in future seasons where, you know, suddenly they'll have a character who is 16 and they can just, you know, continue the teenage antics, you know?
Maybe.
Yeah, that's probably not going to happen now, but that's always been my theory.
You know, I like that. And she did, at least she got one spotlight episode where she ran off and everyone's worried about her. And, you know, I guess a meta commentary about how the show tends to neglect her just as the characters do. And it led to a great moment with Jonathan where he talks about, you know, feeling left out and overlooked as well.
And by the way, Michael Bishop, by the way, he's the new Jonathan. And within an episode or two, you know, we were turning to each other going, God, this guy's better. Like, and I liked Jordan Elsas quite a bit. And this guy's even better. Like, his chemistry with Alex Garfin, who plays Jordan, is perfect. Like, they're just totally, you know, if I could point to one thing that was maybe a little bit off with the previous actor, is that they felt more like best buds. Whereas these
And we had
guys.
Oh,
am I back?
You're back. You're back.
I was just saying that you can buy that they are actually related in so many ways, and he's just great. I really, really like him. I think he's really good.
I agree. Look, that was one of the wonky things going into this season, right? Especially these days, you rarely see a recasting, like just a straight recasting, especially of such a prominent character. And as I've learned, you really can't peg this show down or predict, but I assume there was going to be something where, like, when the season starts, Jonathan's been off playing with the technology in the fortress for a few weeks or something like that. And he comes back and they're like, oh, it looks so different. You grew so much. Clearly, they didn't do any of that. We picked up right where we left off with the Kent family at the fortress. And I agree with you, man. Like, he very, very quickly won me over, and my wife as well. And we really did like the previous actor a lot, but he put his own spin on it while still feeling true to the character. And you know what it was for me in particular, the relationship with Candace. I
Mm,
bought that a lot more now. And like
okay.
watching the last season, I was not the biggest fan of Candace, mostly because I think I really didn't care for her role in sort of roping Jonathan into the XK business. And I feel like they tried to make us sympathetic towards her, but I feel like it came a little bit too late in the game. I didn't like the way that
Mm,
the Candace stuff unfolded last season. And I guess I never totally bought the two of them. And I can't put my
mm.
finger on why exactly, but watching these two, it made more sense to me. So that relationship and then the character of Candace, I was more invested in now. And I attribute a lot of that to Michael Bishop.
Interesting. Yeah, and Candace didn't really have a huge. It was more the stuff they did with her father and the ensuing diner showdown a la Superman 2, which I absolutely loved. But yeah, no, it was an interesting little kind of side note in the middle of the season, definitely.
That diner scene,
Oh
my
yeah.
goodness. I mean, other than Doomsday, that diner scene is, and even still with Doomsday, the diner scene probably is my top moment of the season. How about you?
I would say the scene between Lois and Clark talking about how they're going to approach intimacy in the future was probably the scene of the entire show for me so far. But yeah, that's definitely up there. That diner scene, I absolutely loved it. And a lot of people complain about the diner scene in Superman 2, and some people complain about the one in Man of Steel as well. Whereas this one is decidedly less problematic than either of those. He's
Yeah,
just standing up for his son. He didn't do anything. He didn't do anything really aggressive, really. He didn't hurt the guy. He was just making his presence known and saying, look, you can't get away with this. And I really, really liked it.
everything, and I feel like if you want to know who Superman is, and especially if you want to know who this show's version of Clark and Superman are, this is a great scene. And the
Mm,
preceding scene where he learns that Candace's dad punched Jonathan and drew a gun, threatened Lois. And as he's leaving the house, Lois is like, "This isn't a job for Superman." He's like, "He's not going." It's like
yeah.
this is a job for Clark. And from the moment he enters, he's trying to get what's his name, Emmett or whatever the father's
I
name
can't
is,
remember. Yeah.
but he's trying to get him out of there, right? Like he doesn't want to make a scene. He doesn't want to do this in front of Candace, who's working at the diner. Like you see how considerate he is throughout this,
I
but
said,
you
excuse
also,
me, sir, will you step outside?
and it's just like you see the Jonathan Kent in him. And we've talked about that scene a couple of times on the show so far, and I'll say the same thing that I always say. It's just you really feel this is something he would do even if he had no power at all, and you feel like
Yeah.
this is something he's probably seen Jonathan Kent do at some point where somebody had to be set straight, and Jonathan is going to be direct and he's not going to back down. And man, I loved everything about the scene, including especially going back to Kyle Cushing. Kyle's reaction, he's like, "Damn,
Yeah.
Kent, that's great."
Damn. um, I don't know if you've seen this, but I actually cut that scene with the diner music from Superman 2 put on it, and it's on our I think it's on our Twitter somewhere. It's definitely on my TikTok as well, so people can go and look at that. It's a
I
lot of
did
fun.
see
And
that. I love that.
the music like fits the scene perfectly. Like it doesn't take away from it, and it's like perfectly in time with that music. It's so good.
I mean, not to take us too far afield, but what is your stance on the diner scene from Superman 2? Because it's funny, I never thought twice about it. I always, growing up watching Superman 2, I always enjoyed that scene. I never thought a
Mm.
ton about it. And then in recent years, I've seen that they're really, people are kind of split on whether or not Superman's actions in that are appropriate. Where do you land on that?
I think it's a natural. You want to see that guy get his comeuppance at the end of the movie, and it's a fun little cartoon. Like there are so many. I feel like people take the ethics of Superman 2 so seriously when it really doesn't have the same level of kind of verisimilitude as the first one. It is for many, for all intents and purposes, it's a bit of a cartoon of a movie. And I love Superman 2, but I think there's two things people take way too seriously. One of them is the supposed death of General Zod in the fortress, and the other one is that diner scene. They're both cartoony scenes. They're only there for kind of comedy entertainment value. They're not there to be kind of obsessed about and constantly debated over. And yeah, for me, it's a really, really fun scene. And Christopher Reeve, like there can never be enough good said about that man. This orders to go. Like every time I watch it, I smile. I love it, and I will hear no ill words spoken of that scene. I love it.
The only real problem I have is when you view it in the Donner cut. That's where it all falls apart for me, because he's
Well, the
reversed
Donner,
time and it's never
yeah,
happened. It's just like, what are we doing here?
the Donner cut is just an utterly broken piece of media. Like it doesn't work as a film at all, and it really bothers me that it's viewed as the superior of the two. Like there are scenes in it that are superior, absolutely there are, but all in all, it never comes together as a whole because it wasn't finished. Like, and it's just this weird fan edit of a thing that will never be a full film. And one of the things we're hoping to do on our show is we want to create what we're going to call the Ultimate Superman 2 cut, where we take all the bits we like from all the different versions, including the weird 3 hour long TV edit that was aired in Europe in the 80s and never seen again. And we're going to assemble the ultimate cut of Superman 2. But I do not think the Donner cut is that. It's just a weird mess.
I do agree that the best version is probably a combination of them.
Yeah.
I've gone back and forth on this a little bit. Ultimately, the Jor-El of it all and the toning down of the campiness, or really the eliminating of as much campiness as possible, does make me prefer the Donner cut, except for that ending. It really loses me. But I get where you're coming from. I mentioned you, I think when we did our 100th episode, because I had seen you post something about how it was about a screening of the Donner cut, I think, and you had posted about how, you were lamenting the fact that like this seems to now be kind of overtaking the other one. And it's like the theatrical cut of Superman 2 is what we all grew up with. And, we don't want to see that discounted. So I can totally appreciate that. But yeah, the diner scene is funny. I think when you posted your edit where you added the music, I was like, you should do the Donner cut version of this, where, Superman and Lois gave us Superman flying around the world at the end of season 2 to separate the Earth. So you have that footage. So you could do a whole thing where like Tyler Hoechlin's Clark reverses time. So Jonathan is never punched, but then Clark still goes to the diner and beats the crap out of this guy.
Oh, wow. You've given me some serious ideas now. That's interesting.
Let me go to some patron questions, and this will actually, I think, tee up a couple of things that we hadn't hit on yet. So these are all from Brian Dempsey, one of our top patrons, and thank you, Brian, and thank all patrons for the support. So a few of these things we've already hit on. He asked about Lex in particular, considering how late in the season Lex is being introduced. Do you think it would have been better to keep his casting quiet? Yes, definitely. And I mean, we haven't talked about this depiction of Lex, but kind of on this note, how do you like this interpretation of Lex Luthor?
Well, I'm a little bit uncertain, I have to say. I'm all about the casting. Michael Cudlitz, an inspired choice. You cannot fault his performance at all. I think he's great. I just think so far he's been kind of built up as this vengeful mobster, which to me seems like a missed opportunity. And like there's an awful lot of those scenes in the penultimate episode where he's in prison and he's bartering and he's doing all this stuff with the razor and all that. I was kind of like, this feels very similar to what we saw in the Daredevil show with Kingpin. And, for me, I think this series has already cashed in its free MCU character voucher with Tal Rowe, who was basically Loki from the Thor movies. I kind of can't really let them get away with it again, And for me, like, not to get political or about it or anything like that, but when you have all of these examples out there in the world of these crazed billionaires who think they're geniuses, who are trying to destroy the world, it actually feels a little bit irresponsible to kind of go, okay, well, we have Lex Luthor, let's just make him this mobster guy who is he's on a vengeful crusade against Lois and Clark. Now, that being said, he's going to be a regular cast member in season 4, so we don't really know what they're going to do with him in that. I'm very intrigued to find out more about the Contessa del Portenza, who apparently exists in the world of this show, and his daughter, Lena Luthor, from 90s comics. Very delighted to hear they're probably going to be on the cards, and hopefully they will be regulars too. Really excited to see all that. But in the 2 episodes we've seen, it felt a little bit too much like Stone Cold Stephen D'Onofrio to me, Vincent D'Onofrio. Again, no disrespect at all to Michael Cudlitz, who I think is great, and he looks great. He looks the part. That's all fine. Just wasn't 100% on the interpretation.
I hear you, and I totally agree about the Contessa and Lena. Those references are great. I'm excited to see that play out. The woman who Sam Lane is dating, he gives her name as
Gretchen
Gretchen,
Kelly.
so Gretchen Kelly, and we have
And
Otis.
she was played by Rebecca Stabb from the 1994 Roger Corman Fantastic Four movie.
Oh, I saw someone. Maybe it was you who tweeted about
That
that
was
recently.
Michael Bailey tweeted it. I was like, God, I totally and I only watched that the other week. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So no, those pulls from the 90s triangle era are always great, always appreciated.
Yeah.
When we talk about feeling like the show is made for us, I think that's these are perfect instances where it's like clearly the comics that were formative for us were for a lot of the people involved in the show. So that's always awesome.
Never mind the comics. There was a Superboy reference in this season.
Oh, that's right.
There was a Superboy reference and there was a Lois and Clark reference. So there's a scene where Superman is facing onomatopoeia and a truck drives behind her and says Eckworth Industries. That is a direct reference to an episode of Superboy season 2. And it was put in there by Max Kronik, who I believe is the story editor, and he's been trying to get a Superboy reference in the entire time. And then later on in the season, Lois is reading a book about Wanda Detroit, who was a character from a novel that Lois was writing in Lois and Clark. Both references just blew me away more than anything in the Flash. Like these were the ones where I was kind of going, yeah.
Those were some amazing Easter eggs. Yeah, the Wanda Detroit from one of the most beloved arcs in Lois and Clark history. We had fun when we talked about it, but it's fun. It's fun.
Look, John Shea makes that arc for me. It's crazy. It's ridiculous. He's so good as Lex Luthor, and especially in those episodes, this means war, that I can forgive all the unfathomable tomfoolery that's going on elsewhere.
Yeah. Hey, listen, when he finds out that Clark is Superman and he shows up at Clark's apartment and he blasts him, and Pa Kent is there with him. Oh, great stuff. So yeah, those polls were great. And yeah, I mean, as far as this Lex, I like this. I like what we've seen so far. We do definitely need to see more. I mean, I like the physicality and the intensity that this version has. Look, the John Cryer version ended up being a lot better than I thought he was going to be, and better than he had any right to be. When they announced that casting, I was like, oh, really? But look, we've seen enough at this point. We got to keep an open mind. And I think in terms of what role he was there to fill in the Arrowverse on the Supergirl show and Crisis and all of that, I think he did a great job. And again, was better than I thought. Still doesn't, he doesn't land as one of the all-time great Lex Luthors in my mind. So all that's to say, I was ready to see a new interpretation of the character. And I like that this, there was this physicality and intensity. I mean, it's funny when we see him in prison and you see him picking a fight with those guys. I'm like, oh, is he just going to fight them and beat them? Yeah. And then, of course, that's not the case. And I was a little bit split on that, because on the one hand, I'm like, it would actually be, I mean, that would be a quick way to show you who this guy is and establish him. But at the same time, I guess ultimately it made more sense that he exerts his leverage over the warden and uses that to get what he wants, as opposed to literally being able to physically dominate. But it would have been a different approach.
It is such a kingpin maneuver, though, to have all this unseen army out there, and they've got his family, and it's just really mafia vibes I got from it. That to me isn't Lex. I just didn't. It felt like, we've spoken about George Reeves. Like, there's so many episodes of that where a villain will come, they'll escape from prison, and it'll be someone that Clark Kent sent away years ago with a story he wrote, and like it could just as easily have been Max Menken or whatever. Like there was nothing in it that felt essentially Lex to me in the ways that John Cryer and Michael Rosenbaum and all those guys felt. And again, they can develop on that. We're like, thank goodness that the Lex Corp or the Luthor Corp, they're still calling it Luthor Corp. Can we call it Lex Corp?
I know.
The Luthor Corp building is the beautiful post-crisis one that actually looks like an L. So that's there in Metropolis. So hopefully we will go there in season 4 and see all that. They can explore the white collar stuff a bit more. So the stage is definitely set. But in these 2 episodes, I don't know.
It's true. In these 2 episodes, again, you see the flashbacks to him in prison and how he becomes top dog, and then in the present day, he's walking for most of the episode, walking to the Kent farm.
That was cool. I like that.
And then underground in the train tunnels, a la the Superman movies, as he's experimenting on Bizarro, and that was brutal. That was really
Yes,
brutal. The constant killing of that character to eventually turn him into Doomsday. It was like a little tough to stomach at a couple of points.
I will say, I keep saying that it's not essentially Lex. When he plays the music, and we're so used to hearing Lex play classical music, and then this time he's playing like really heavy metal. I thought that was a nice change. That was nice.
That was cool. Not to nitpick, but it's my wife and I are both laughing about this when he shows up at the Kent farm and he's there to finally confront Lois, right? Because she wrote the
Mm,
article that put him away, and we know, and everybody knows Lex not a great guy, but he actually wasn't guilty of the crimes that he went to
yes.
prison for. That was Bruno and Pia, and Onomatopoeia. She used her sonic abilities to fake this confession from Lex, and so Lex is here now to confront Lois. And the whole episode, every time we see Lex, he's marching towards somewhere. Eventually, we find out it's the Kent farm. It's like, what's he gonna say? What's he gonna threaten? And this whole thing is like, you have to retire. And obviously, look, being a reporter is a core tenet of who Lois is. So of course, that's a big deal. I don't mean to diminish that, but it just,
Mm.
I did have this feeling of like, oh, it's like for Lex Luthor, I don't know, I was expecting something worse or more sinister. It's like all of that. He's like, I just stopped writing articles. It's like, oh, okay. I mean, clearly she's not going to do that, but I don't know. I think I was expecting something a little bit
I
more severe.
I do kind of like the idea though that Lex's vindictive, sinister tendencies only really come to the surface when he doesn't get his way. And if he actually just got his way, then he wouldn't be as much of a monster as he is. Like I was debating with someone about the 88 miles to Metropolis. You know that story?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like it's one of my favorites. And the person I was debating with was, well, I don't know if Lex would really be, going around doing these nasty things and then bragging to his staff about it afterwards. And my reading on that is, well, no, the reason Lex is doing that is because he feels powerless in a world with Superman in it. So in order to feel like he still has power, he just does these nasty little hobbies that he has. And this to me felt a little bit like that. It was like he's given Lois this ultimatum, this simple ultimatum of just, well, you can just retire. But if you don't, that's when it gets, nasty. And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, for sure. A few more questions from Brian. This one we addressed. He said, I felt like the actor playing Jonathan slipped into the role rather nicely, though he seems
Mm.
more soft spoken. What did you think of him? Yeah, I mean, we were both fans. I mean, that's not an easy thing to step into. And I read an interview with him where he said, like, his first day on set, Tyler Hoechlin like took him
I read
aside and
that
he's
as
like,
well.
look, this is your role now. This is your thing. You do it. And that's very nice to see. Brian also asks about the breast cancer storyline. He said, this was a hard season to watch. It was well scripted and acted by the two leads. I really felt they had many moments testing Clark in ways we haven't seen in live action before. His sense of helplessness, his solemn support of his wife. Did these small scenes elicit an emotional response from you? I mean, yeah, it's like, for anyone in your life, but especially, like sitting next to our significant others as we're watching,
100%.
this, it's like you can't help but think of that. So definitely.
And to go back to something I was saying earlier on, in the finale, there's that wonderful scene you were talking about where they fly to Italy and Lois is like, well, I want to do it right now, kind of thing. Wonderful scene. I feel like that scene belongs at the end of next season. I feel like that the scene I loved so much was the scene where they're really talking about the future of their intimacy and are we actually going to be able to do this? It's going to take time, but we're going to put the work in. We're going to make it work. To me, 30 days after she finishes her treatment feels a little bit too accelerated. And again, going back to that thing of maybe they thought that this was going to be their last episode and they wouldn't have a chance to do it again. If so, that's fine. But I would have liked to have seen that maybe a little bit farther down the line. But again, you can't fault the scene or the performance. It was amazing. So good.
Yeah, and kind of on that note of acceleration, I all along the way I kept waiting for some sort of time jump. Like even once we
Yeah.
were in the storyline, I still kept figuring, well, we won't stay here forever. And especially she had the double mastectomy. I figured, we end up getting that 30-day time, but I thought it was would be like months later and she's had the reconstruction and all of that and she's back to quote unquote normal. But they stayed with her throughout all of that, and I'm glad they did. I mean, because that's the
Me too.
reality of this. And for people who have gone through this, it's like that is what it is. And I think that would have been doing a disservice to that storyline, and for people who have lived with this, if they jumped over anything. So but you got to give them credit for really staying in it the way that they did. And to Brian's question, we talked about this. I mean, yeah, there are a lot of it's interesting. How do I put this? Watching this, and I watched this, we watched this basically live or time delayed via DVR, but every night, mostly because I don't want to get spoiled on Twitter. So it's like I'm trying to watch it as quickly as possible, but also, was genuinely excited to watch. But there was also this feeling of like this was so heavy
Yeah.
that you really kind of had to steel yourself a little bit before you went in. It's not just like, oh, like it's, he's going to fight a freak of the week this week. It's like, no, this is, you really kind of had to emotionally prepare yourself for it. But that's not a criticism. It's, I think, a
No.
testament to what they did.
No, and going back to what I was saying, like I think this is an adult storyline, not in that it's mature or it's violent or it's dark or anything like that. It's something that adults have to deal with. It's not really something that, well, please God, it's not something that people in their early 20s or in their teens have to deal with as much. So I would absolutely understand if there was someone, of that generation watching, kind of going, well, I want to watch Superman. What's going on here? So no, I really, really admire them for doing that. And I just think it was so strong and it really spoke to me in a big way. I really loved it.
There was a moment that I guess I kind of wanted to see, but at the same time, it probably would have been too on the nose. And I admire the restraint that the show exercised
Mm.
and that Clark did. But I guess the whole idea that he has these powers and they can't help in this instance, that theme is definitely there. But I guess all along the way, I was hoping for / waiting for Clark to more explicitly articulate his frustration of like, I'm Superman, like I can do anything. Again, you feel his frustration, so maybe it didn't need to be said, but I don't know.
Yeah,
How do you feel about that?
I know what you mean. And I feel like they, to me, I was satisfied that they did it in a more subtle way than that. I felt like that was coming across throughout. And we've seen his big, like he had a big Superman speech at the end of season 1. And I think there was another one in season 2. We've seen all these examples of Superman kind of expressing that mentality that there's always a way. There's, we can fight on no matter what. We've seen so much of that in this version of the character that I bought it, that this would be something he wouldn't be able to verbalize. Um, and yeah, no, I know what you're saying, but it didn't bother me.
Yeah, I think that's ultimately where I land too.
Mm.
On a more superficial note, Brian asks, it seemed to me that Tyler's ever-present 10 o'clock shadow was a little more under control this season compared to last. Do you agree or disagree? I don't know that I was really tracking it that much. I don't know. It seemed the same to me, but I don't know. Did you notice anything?
I didn't really notice that. I will say the magic trick of the 10 o'clock shadow, as he calls it. There's a little bit of salt and pepper in there, so it makes Tyler Hoechlin look a little bit older than Tyler Hoechlin's like 2 years older than me, and I completely buy him as this 40-something-year-old man who is the father of teenage sons. Like in every episode, it never bothers me that he's like the same age as me. It's weird, and I
Yeah,
think the beard helped.
yeah, for sure. No, I'm on board with the beard look. And then Brian's last question is: we haven't talked yet about John Henry, but generally and specifically in the context of his relationship with Lana. But yeah, I mean, John Henry had some business this season dealing with his doppelganger on this world and his past, and that's of course what leads him to Bruno and to the doppelganger of his sister. He has to deal with Nat starting to date. And he clearly does not handle that well. That first dinner with Mateo goes very poorly. There's also an interesting episode early on when Nat wants to give Lois the necklace, right?
Mm.
That had belonged to her mom, and he has a very, very strong reaction to that. And then, of course, the tension between John and Sam and Superman over how to handle Bruno Mannheim, and then this growing development of his feelings for Lana and vice versa. So, yeah, I mean, how did you feel about John Henry's stories over the course of the season?
Really, really strong, and again, the animosity with Bruno was probably the highlight of it, but it was actually my partner Saoirse made this great point that in seeing Pia pass the way Natalie and John Henry did, not only did they kind of become kind of kindred spirits with Bruno in a way, but it almost helped them come to terms with the death of their Lois in a way. Like they don't express it, but it's just a nice coming full circle kind of thing. And remember as well that Superman was responsible in their universe for Lois's death, and in this universe he's not directly responsible, but he is the one who brings the body of Pia down. So there was just a nice kind of mirroring of the two events there that I really, really liked. It was an interesting point. And I did think we saw some of Wole Park's best acting in those scenes with Mannheim this season, and just the tension between them, and the tension between him and Natalie when she wanted to be with Matteo, which at times was a little bit kind of stilted and a bit contrived, but I forgave it because of the scale of everything going on. Really, really good stuff. The Lana thing, I was kind of like, okay, well, if Kyle pairs off with Chrissy, we need these two to pair off, so that's fine. They had a bit of chemistry. It was a nice little date, and they had a nice kiss. It wasn't something that I was rooting for quite as much as kind of Chrissy and Kyle, but it was nice. I must point out, actually, your episode on the Steel movie, I was really very fond of, and your colleague who you had on at the time, whose name escapes me, he spoke wonderfully about the Steel comics that he read in his youth and how great they were. And I often find myself wondering what he must think of this version of the character, because it is so different to the Steel of the comics. It's effectively an original character. And while I'm very, very pleased with what they've done with John Henry Irons, I do wonder if fans of the character might be kind of going, well, this isn't Steel at all.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. I feel like there are enough of those, those aspects of the character where it tracks. But yes, they've definitely done their own thing with him. But yeah, I think, yeah, I agree. I think everything with John Henry and Bruno was very strong. And
Yeah.
on both sides. And again, going back to what we were saying about Bruno, when you have a compelling villain with reasonable motivations, the fact that we get to a place of peace, or at least understanding, between Bruno and John Henry really speaks to that. Although it felt like maybe a bridge too far. Although I ultimately I think they earned it. But just in that moment at the DOD in Bruno's final scene where he's like saying to John Henry, like, look out for Matteo. It's like, all right. I feel like that might be pushing things a little bit, but he lands all right. He's at we find out he's at the DOD Academy.
That's very strange, man. I'm sorry. Why would you let someone like that into the DOD Academy?
Yeah, that feels like you're asking for trouble. Although I don't know, maybe they're like, listen, we got to keep an eye on this kid. We put him in here. It makes me think of that planned but now aborted Arrowverse spinoff, Justice U, that was going to star David Ramsey as Diggle, where he's like the professor at a superhero academy. That's what I think of when I talk about DOD Academy. I liked Sam, really, and we don't see a ton of it, but taking Nat under his wing, and even by the time we get to the finale, introducing her as his granddaughter. I really like that. Yeah, the Nat Mateo stuff, I agree with you. I chalk it up to, there's only so much real estate here. We assume that this is developing more off screen because they get to I love, and look, they're also kids, and it's first love. I have to check myself and kind of remember that, but it just felt like we got to I love you like real fast. It's like, all right.
And some of his whole kind of like tracking Natalie down and driving all the way out to Smallville, and some of that was kind of like, I don't know if this is romantic or just creepy, guys.
A little bit of that. But that actor, so he was on AP Bio. I was going to say short-lived, but it ran 4 seasons, sitcom with Glenn Howerton from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. So he was on that. And then it's funny, I didn't place him. And then I was talking with our mutual friend Lance Laster, and he's like, oh, you know what he's from, right? And I was like, what? He played the young version of Jonathan Majors' character from Creed 3 in the flashbacks.
Oh my goodness, so he did. Great. Oh,
Damien,
God, that's
Damien.
given me a whole new respect for that guy. Yeah, those scenes were great. Creed 3 was awesome.
Yeah, so he's had a nice run, this young actor. I really did like him in this because I feel like he did a really good job. I thought he walked a nice line because you buy him as just this sort of nice kid, right? And wholesome, wholesome love interest. But you also could buy that depending on how things break here in terms of everything with his mom, he could go down a different path. And as I'm watching this, once again, a prediction that proved wrong. As I'm watching this, I'm like, oh, I could see him like stepping up for his, like Bruno gets taken out, but now he's had this dark turn and now he rises. And clearly that wasn't what they did. And I'm ultimately glad they didn't, I guess. But I would have bought that. Like I thought he walked a good line there.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Now, maybe this is telling that we haven't yet even, I don't know if we've even mentioned Jordan.
Ooh, yeah. Strange shift there, wasn't it?
Yeah, he had a rough season. He continued his budding superheroics, complete with a costume that was very, very in line with a proto costume that Clark wore in the American Alien comic book miniseries with the goggles and everything.
Yeah, I had to have that pointed out to me. I admit I didn't. I was kind of, what are they? Is this like the Rocketeer, like, or like some kind of Max Fleischer throwback or something? I didn't really know what they were going for with that, but that's kind of cool. Yeah, I like that Max Landis story, even though I don't really like Max Landis.
Yeah,
Anyway,
problematic author aside, the book I
yeah,
think is really, really interesting. And
yeah.
it's funny, it's been a while since I watched it now, but that Superman Man of Tomorrow animated movie with Darren Criss
Hmm.
voicing him, I feel, do they put him in like a proto costume like that as well? I can't remember.
That's one I haven't seen, actually. I have to admit, Alan is a big fan, and we were hoping to do an episode on it at some stage, but I'm not sure.
Oh yeah, I did. I mean, I need a rewatch because clearly it's been a while. I don't remember all of it, but it was. I remembered liking it. It was solid. But yeah, so I mean, there's that aspect, but he's just like really not handling the breakup with Sarah well or maturely at all. And then even in his superhero guise, really his ego gets the better of him, and he starts to enjoy the adoration. And despite being told to stand down and not use his powers and go home, he continues to insert himself. He helps Clark dissolve a tornado, and then he lands and takes pictures, selfies with people,
Hmm.
and really crosses the line, and it leads to one of my favorite scenes from the season when they had their confrontation in the Kent kitchen, and like Clark goes to grab him, and Jordan uses his powers, and Clark's like, "Don't you ever do that again!" And that's the dad in me, and I was like, "Oh yeah, like that would be that's
And
that's a
again,
tense moment."
great Tyler Hoechlin acting there. Like, just that look of just utter, not just fury, but also disappointment. And he's just really heartbroken that this just happened. Really, really good stuff. And shout out to that, they do this little special effect when he pushes him. So it's just this like super strength shockwave kind of goes up in the air, and it's so subtle, but it's really, really well done. Um, and yeah, it's almost like they built Jordan's whole kind of teenage rebellion around being able to do that scene in a way. The Superman fanboy in me was like, are they going to have to go to the Fortress of Solitude and use the molecule chamber from Superman 2 and take away his powers? But luckily they didn't do anything as ridiculous as that, but there's still time.
Yeah, well, especially with their reduced budget next season, they might they might
Yeah,
all be
yeah,
going into
exactly.
that molecule chamber. But it's funny. So I don't. My wife wasn't too keen on Jordan this season, and that's probably, I feel like that's probably how a lot of people felt. It was
Mm.
a little frustrating, but you know what? Ultimately, it worked. I do wish for the actor's sake they had given him maybe a little bit more to do or a little bit more to chew on. A lot of it really, and it's funny too. When I rewatch this, maybe there's more stuff that I'm kind of glossing over, and it's like, oh yeah, but
Yeah,
I kind of just looking back on it in some, it just feels like so much of it was what we just talked about. But I do this whole bit about the ego and just wanting the attention and everything. I mean, it is natural. And it's like, I was saying to my wife, I was like, in the pilot episode of Smallville, Clark gets that truck from Lex and he wants to keep it.
yeah.
And he's like, pleading with Jonathan. He's like, well, I saved his life. And Pa's like, well, but you think you deserve a prize? And that's kind of it for Clark. And we kind of move from there. But it is a reasonable, natural, I think, inclination or something to struggle with. And so that piece of it made sense. The continuing heartache over Sarah, that's what kind of I think grew
Yeah.
more tiresome for me.
And to your point as well, like, one of the things I really admire about the show is they're not afraid to write teenagers in a way where they're actually, it's plausible that they would act that way because they're teenagers. And that's why sometimes I think the show really does skew to an older audience, because teenagers don't want to know that they're irrational and kind of make impulsive, rash decisions and stuff like that. So I thought it worked in that way. Whereas Smallville was kind of presented in a way where you are supposed to think that these are idealistic people that you could, it's nearly designed in a way that you're supposed to look up to them, and they're nearly supposed to feel like adults. Whereas watching this show, no, these are kids. Like, they're going to make stupid decisions, and if Clark's son has powers, he's going to deal with it in a really ridiculous way. Um, Absolutely agree on the relationship with Sarah, and I have to say, during the finale, when they had their moment in the diner where he kind of apologized for his poor behavior, and then they shook hands, and I kind of turned to Saoirse and I was like, yeah, that's that's enough now. That's like they're not getting back together now. This is like Dawson and Joey in Dawson's Creek. It's like she can't end up with him now. It's too far gone, I think, and it's a very nice, amicable, platonic breakup there, and that's that. And I really hope they don't go back to that well.
Yes, no, I agree with that. There was at least one moment. I guess it was the episode where Sophie goes missing and Jonathan really steps up. Did you think that they were going to maybe go in a Jonathan Sarah direction?
I believe that they will do that. I wouldn't have anything against it. I think that would be an interesting route to go. And it would but then you're kind of like, they've only got 10 episodes left. Are they going to be able to draw out the kind of drama you'd need to do a storyline like that? I don't know, but I really like the actress who plays Sarah, and she often has to be the bad guy in a lot of these kind of showdowns with Jonathan and stuff, or with Jordan. So I really wouldn't mind if they explored. The other thing they could do, of course, is she explored her sexuality in previous seasons. They might have her end up with someone else, or no one. They might not go down a romantic route with her again. But I definitely thought, yeah, they could have her and Jonathan get together.
Yeah, I like the couple of instances where they gave her something to do that had nothing to do with Jordan, like
Mm.
when she has the fight with Lana and Lana slaps her. Whoa, that was intense.
Yeah, did they kind of gloss over that a bit though?
I don't know. I felt like because then she goes to Kyle's and she spends the night, and then they have the whole family meeting about it, and I feel like
Mm.
they
Yeah.
did their due diligence with that, I suppose. But there was that, and then when she bonds with Chrissy, again, like
Oh yeah, that
unexpected
was
character,
good.
like the character pairings, and you see that, and Chrissy's got weed gummies or mushrooms or whatever in her bag, or whatever it was, and then of course Lana sees that, like that. I thought that stuff was great.
That was good, and it was sensibly handled. And a great moment from Chrissy where she was talking about how she had a divorced dad as well, and that actress especially has had great material to work with this season. She's really come into her own. And yeah, again, going back to what I was saying earlier on, really really grateful that they kind of gave those actors in particular more to do. She was really good at, yeah, really really like that. And it could have been something that they dragged out for too long, and they could have done a whole CW shenanigans with it, but they didn't. They were really sensible and really authentic with it. I really liked that.
Yeah, the character who would be Chloe, who could have been Chloe.
Yeah. And they made her wear that weird Alison Mack wig in season 2 when she went to a cult meeting. What were they doing there?
I know, you guys
Remember
know. I
that?
was like, what's going on here, guys? Yeah, no, all in all, even Alison Mack aside, I'm glad Chrissy Beppo is her own character, and
Absolutely.
yeah, I liked where that went. And then, yeah, with Lana, again, I think we've hit on a lot of the main pieces here. Of course, she's dealing with being mayor. I like seeing her in that capacity to the extent that we do. And I liked her with John Henry, especially. Again,
Mm.
it's frustrating because we don't know how much, if at all, we'll see them next season. So at least we got to the point of them having their date and then continuing it after and really really going at it. And I was like, good for them.
Yeah.
I feel like both of them like really need it.
They were, ooh,
Yeah, and the date,
they were
it's
going
funny.
for it.
Yeah, and like the date itself, we pick up with Lana talking about her broken marriage and Kyle. And I'm like, what are you doing here? But she recovered. She recovered with the hand. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, is there anything else about this season that we haven't talked about that you wanted to?
I'm just looking through my notes here. No, just I think I've just been effusive with my praise, and anyone who listens to my show will know that I don't just shower things with praise all the time. I'm frequently very critical, and just really really grateful that this existed and that we have it for a little bit longer, and that it tackled the things it did, but in the way that it did, and it's just a tribute to everyone involved. And shout out to Adam Mallinger, by the way. Forgot to say that. Adam Mallinger, he goes by Bitter Script Writer on Twitter. And he and a guy called Max Kronik are responsible for a lot of the little Easter eggs in the show. And he is a massive, massive Superman fanatic. He loves the kind of era of comics that we all love, the death of and post crisis and all that. And a lot of the references, I believe, are him and that other guy, Max Kronik. And he's really, really active on Twitter. He's constantly posting Superman related content. And he actually, before we go, obviously directors are always giving out about superhero movies and that they're whatever, they're childish, they're not cinema, they're theme park rides and all this kind of stuff. And I think it was James Cameron who said that all superhero movies focus on characters who are basically just college students and they don't have anything more complicated to deal with than that. And they never deal with truly adult situations. And Adam Mallinger tweeted this thing basically going, can somebody send me James Cameron's address? Because I have 2 seasons of a CW show I would love to send him. And I just thought, yeah, way to go. He's absolutely right.
No, that is amazing. So yeah, shout out to him and the whole crew. And actually, one last question. We touched on this, but yeah, this season was definitely far lighter on Superman and the action generally. And there was at least one episode where there was no Superman at all, and plenty of episodes where Superman was pretty minimal. To be honest, I was fine with that, especially in terms of this story that they were telling. I guess, how did you feel about that? And also, do you feel like this was at all in part to demonstrate that they could tell a smaller scale story such that they could have a season 4 with less budget because there are other ways for them to sort of go about their business?
Let me tell you about 2 Superman shows I love, Anthony. Adventures of Superman from the 50s and Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman from the 90s, both of which had to deal with a television landscape where there was no CGI and there was very limited Supermaning that they could do. And they told great, grounded, low-key stories. And personally, those are the kind of Superman stories I prefer. If we only see Superman for a minute or 2 an episode, but we tell a really engaging, character-driven Clark Kent story, absolutely fine by me, baby. I would much prefer that than, a 2-hour cartoon where he's just being punched into buildings the whole time. I absolutely no problem with that at all. And I saw someone on Reddit going, no, there needs to be a quota. There needs to be a percentage of the episode devoted to Superman action. And I was going, oh my God, no, don't let this person anywhere near a writer's room, No, I'm absolutely fine with that.
As am I. And again, it does. I mean, I've always had a lot of confidence in this show, but I think I'm even more optimistic about season 4, even with them having less resources at their disposal, because I think they've really shown they can do a lot without the spectacle side of it. So I'm looking forward to season 4. Maybe a little cautiously optimistic still, but I'll keep an open mind. And I'm glad that we're getting this, because again, it really seemed like we weren't going to. So I thank you so much for coming to talk about the season with me. I really enjoyed it. And where would you like to direct folks towards your podcast?
All-Star Superfan. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Our Twitter is All-Star Superpod, and all of our other socials are All-Star Superfan. We, by the time this goes out, we have an episode about the man who has everything, which we definitely mention Superman and Lois in there as well. We talk about all the other media versions of that story, and then obviously the comic as well. And it's a really, really good one, so check that one out.
Awesome. I encourage everyone to do that. So thank you again, Rob. Thank you, audience. I always appreciate you tuning in. Next week, folks, it begins. Red Skies, our epic 13 episode look back at DC's crisis level events. It's going to be a really big, fun run of episodes, and I hope you will join us for it. So it all kicks off next week. And of course, it's about what you do. It's about action. This show is part of the Flat Squirrel Podcast Network, home to Digging for Kryptonite, another exciting episode in the adventures of Superman, Summoning the Zords, and My Comic Shop History, available wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review today. Sign up at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato for additional content. Thank you all.